The detective stopped my father's funeral and said, "We need to open the casket again," then pulled out handcuffs. I was holding my mother's hand when Detective Brennan walked through the chapel doors during the eulogy. The entire congregation turned to stare as his footsteps echoed against the marble floor. My Uncle Gerald stopped mid-sentence, his voice cracking on a story about my father's love of sailing. For a moment, I thought the detective was just paying respects. Maybe my dad had helped him with a case years ago. But then Brennan walked straight past the pews, past my sobbing mother, and stopped directly in front of the casket. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to open this casket immediately." The room went silent except for someone's shocked gasp near the back. My mother squeezed my hand so hard I felt my bones shift. "What are you talking about?" I stood up, my voice shaking. "My father died of a heart attack 3 days ago. You have no right to be here." Brennan's face was stone. "Ma'am, I understand this is difficult, but I have a court order." He pulled folded papers from his jacket. "Your father's death is now part of an active investigation." My brother Ian jumped up from the front row, his face red with rage. "This is insane. Our father is dead. You're disrupting his funeral with some kind of sick joke." But Brennan wasn't joking. 2 uniformed officers appeared at the chapel entrance, and my stomach dropped. "Investigation into what?" my mother whispered, her voice barely audible. Brennan looked at her with something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Lawrence, I need you and your family to step back." The funeral director, looking absolutely terrified, was already being instructed by one of the officers I watched in horror as they began opening my father's casket, the same casket we'd carefully selected 4 days ago, the one with brass handles that my dad would have hated for being too fancy. Mom was crying, Ian was shouting at Brennan about lawyers and lawsuits, and I just stood there frozen, watching them lift the lid. Then I saw my father's face, peaceful and still, exactly as we'd left him after the viewing this morning. "See?" Ian was practically screaming. "There's nothing wrong. You're desecrating our father's body for nothing." But Brennan wasn't looking at my father's face. He was looking at my father's hands, folded across his chest in the traditional pose. With gloved hands, he carefully lifted my father's right hand and turned it over. There, on the inside of his wrist, was a small tattoo I'd never seen before, a series of numbers, 301965. My father had always said he hated tattoos, had grounded me for a week when I got one at 18. Why would he have one? Brennan photographed it, then addressed the entire chapel. "I need the Lawrence family to come with me. Now." My Uncle Gerald spoke up, his voice defensive. "What does an old tattoo have to do with anything?" Brennan turned to face all of us, and I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold, because 3 weeks ago, we exhumed a body from a construction site in Nevada. The man had been buried there for 30 years. He was identified through DNA as Thomas Lawrence, reported missing in 1994. My mother made us sound like a wounded animal. That's impossible. My husband is Thomas Lawrence. The chapel erupted into chaos. Relatives were shouting questions, my Aunt Diane was crying, and Ian grabbed Brennan's arm before the officers pulled him back. I felt like I was watching everything through water. Nothing made sense. Brennan continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "The man in that grave was killed execution style. He had this exact tattoo, same numbers, same location. It's a prisoner identification number from a federal facility. We've been searching for his killer for 3 weeks. Then yesterday, we received an anonymous tip that Thomas Lawrence was alive and living under his victim's identity." I looked at my mother, whose face had gone completely white. She was staring at the casket like she'd never seen it before. "Mom?" I grabbed her shoulders. "Mom, what's going on?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. "I don't know," she whispered, but I could tell she was lying. Brennan pulled out handcuffs and I realized with dawning horror who they were for Mrs. Lawrence. "We have evidence that you've known about your husband's true identity for at least 15 years. You're under arrest for accessory to murder and identity fraud." The next few hours were a blur of police stations and lawyers. Ian and I sat in a small room while detectives explained that the man we'd called our father was actually named Richard Webb, a former inmate who'd killed his cellmate Thomas Lawrence after their release, stolen his identity, and disappeared into a normal life. Our mother had discovered the truth when she found old prison letters in 2008, but never reported it. She'd chosen to stay with a murderer rather than destroy the life they'd built. The real Thomas Lawrence had a sister who'd been searching for him for 30 years, never knowing he'd been dead and buried in the Nevada desert while someone else wore his name like a costume. When they finally let us see our mother, she was crying. "I loved him," she said. "Whatever he did before, he was a good husband, a good father. How could I destroy our family?" Ian walked out without a word. I stayed for another moment, looking at this woman I thought I knew. "You let us mourn a lie," I said quietly. "Everything we said about him today, none of it was even real." The funeral was rescheduled after they released the body, but only 6 people came. Now there's a second funeral being planned in Nevada for the real Thomas Lawrence, where his sister can finally say goodbye.